Part 1. The Sea That Should Not Remember. They chose the evening with care, as if the sea itself had been invited and needed to be pleased. The boat was small but well kept, scrubbed clean that afternoon until the fiberglass shone faintly under the dying sun. 2 candles sat in thick glass holders so the wind would not steal their flames. The food was simple: bread, cheese, something warm packed into insulated containers, but it was enough. It was never about the meal. Wine moved slowly between their glasses, poured in careful arcs to match the rocking of the waves. They spoke quietly, leaning close, their voices mixing with the soft slap of water against the hull. The harbor lights shrank behind them, one by one, until the shore became a low glow, and then nothing at all. The ocean was calm, unnaturally so. Its surface reflected the sky like black glass, smooth and unbroken, as though the sea were holding its breath. They joked about it, about how perfect the night was, about how this would be the kind of memory that survived arguments, years, and distance. Neither of them noticed how quickly the land disappeared. The first gust felt accidental, a sudden push against the side of the boat, strong enough to rattle the cutlery, but not enough to alarm. The second gust came harder, snapping the edge of a sail and forcing the man to stand, his smile tightening as he adjusted their course. The third gust did not pass. The wind rose as if summoned, howling through ropes and rigging with a sound that was almost vocal. Waves formed where there had been none, steep and sharp, slamming into the hull with blunt, punishing force. The boat lurched, wine spilling, candles guttering dangerously. This was no gradual storm. It was a decision. Rain followed, cold and needling, driven sideways into their faces. The sea that had been so calm moments before now seemed offended, angry at being mistaken for something gentle. The boat stopped feeling like a vessel and began to feel like a fragile thing being tested. They stopped talking. There was no room for conversation now. Only action, reaction, and the growing understanding that whatever had found them out here had done so deliberately. The GPS was the first to go. Its screen flickered, lines distorting as if something beneath the glass were moving, then went black. The radio followed, static swelling briefly, painfully loud, before collapsing into silence. The compass spun once, twice, and then settled on nothing that made sense. The man tapped each device harder than necessary, as though force could bring certainty back. It did not. The woman watched his face, saw the moment when confidence slipped and something colder took its place. Darkness closed in around them, heavy and complete. The storm swallowed sound in strange ways, muting some noises while amplifying others. The wind screamed, but the sea itself felt distant, as though they were floating inside a sealed world. Without instruments, without reference points, direction became a concept rather than a fact. Up and down still existed. Forward did not. They were alone in a way that no amount of technology had ever prepared them for. The storm did not rage, it endured. Hour after hour passed without any noticeable change, the sky remaining a solid mass of darkness, the rain unrelenting. No moon broke through the clouds, no stars offered themselves as witnesses. Time became fluid, measured only by exhaustion and the slow ache in their muscles. Cold seeped into everything. Their clothes clung wetly to their skin, and the boat groaned under each impact, wood and metal complaining like living things. Every sound felt too loud, too close. There were moments, brief, treacherous moments, when the storm seemed to lessen, when the rain softened just enough to inspire hope. Each time the wind returned stronger, as if punishing them for believing it would ever stop. By the time the rain finally eased, neither of them could have said how long the night had lasted. It felt endless. It felt intentional. Dawn came without color. The darkness thinned slowly, reluctantly, revealing not sunlight but fog. Thick, pale, and oppressive. It lay across the sea like a shroud, swallowing sound and distance. The horizon vanished entirely, erased by a uniform wall of gray. The ocean beneath the fog was eerily calm. Too calm. The waves of the storm were gone, replaced by a surface so flat it looked staged, artificial, like a painting that had forgotten how water behaved. Their boat drifted without resistance, rocking gently as if the violence of the night had never happened. The silence was worse than the storm. It pressed in on their ears, making every breath sound intrusive. The woman wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. The fog made the world feel small, confined, as though they were trapped inside something vast and closed. It felt less like mourning and more like an aftermath. They noticed it at the same time. At first, it was nothing more than a darker patch within the fog, a suggestion of mass where there should have been none. The woman squinted, leaning forward, her stomach tightening with a vague, unformed dread. As they drifted closer, the shape sharpened. Lines emerged, vertical edges, a wall rising from the water. It was too large to belong here. Slowly, impossibly, the outline of a ship took form. Its hull loomed out of the mist, towering over their small boat, dark and silent. It did not move with the water. It did not sway. It simply existed, as solid and unmoving as a cliff. The fog seemed to cling to it, reluctant to let it go. Neither of them spoke. Words felt inappropriate, inadequate. The presence of the ship filled the space between them, crowding out every other thought. They watched the water carefully, expecting movement, a wake, ripples, anything that would prove the ship obeyed the same rules they did. There was nothing. The sea around the vessel lay unnaturally smooth, untouched by its bulk. No waves broke against the hull. No foam gathered at its sides. It was as though the water did not recognize it as an object. The man adjusted their course instinctively. But the boat continued drifting straight toward the ship, drawn by a current they could not see or feel. The ship did not approach them. It waited. The realization settled heavily. Whatever force had brought them here was no longer interested in pretending this was an accident. Up close, the ship was wrong in ways that were difficult to name. The hull was constructed of dark, weather-beaten wood, scarred by centuries of salt and storms. Barnacles clung thickly to its lower planks, layered and ancient, as if they had never been scraped away. The sails hung in long, torn strips, stiff with age, yet somehow still attached. The name on the stern had been carved deeply once, but time and erosion had erased it, leaving behind only shallow grooves like old scars. This was not a ship that should have been afloat. It belonged to another era, one without engines, without modern navigation, without any reason to still be here. And yet it was intact, preserved, waiting. They should have turned away. The thought came to both of them with perfect clarity. Nothing forced them to stay. The fog was thick, but not impenetrable. The boat's engine still worked. There was no visible reason not to leave, but reason had begun to lose its authority. Curiosity crept in, quiet and persuasive. Disbelief followed close behind, an insistence that this was simply an abandoned vessel, a rare sight, but nothing more. Admitting fear would mean admitting that something about this place defied explanation. The boat drifted closer, drawn forward not by intention, but by the absence of resistance. Neither of them reached for the controls. Some choices are made by inaction. The collision was gentle. Their boat nudged the massive hull with a soft, hollow sound, wood against wood. It should have been insignificant. It should have meant nothing. Instead, the sound echoed. It carried, spreading along the ship's side, traveling upward and inward, as though the vessel were listening. The noise felt less like an impact and more like a signal. A knock, and somewhere deep within the ship's dark interior, something seemed to answer. Not with movement, not with sound, but with attention. The sea remained perfectly still, and the fog closed in behind them. Part 2. The ship that drifted without wind. The moment their feet left their own boat and touched the Chuji deck, the woman felt it, an absence so complete it bordered on violence. She waited for the familiar complaint of old wood, the tired groan that every aging ship makes when it accepts weight. Nothing answered her. The deck did not react. Her boots pressed into planks bleached by centuries of salt and sun, yet the sound never came. Even the man's heavier step behind her failed to announce itself. It was as if the ship refused to acknowledge motion altogether, as though sound itself had been ruled unnecessary here. She moved again, deliberately shifting her weight, scraping her soul along the wood. Silence. Not the peaceful silence of calm seas or empty spaces, but a controlled silence. a silence that felt curated, maintained. The ship was not abandoned. It was waiting. The air changed with every breath. At first it smelled like the sea, sharp salt, damp wood, old rope. Then as her lungs filled more deeply, subtler layers revealed themselves. Rot. Not fresh decay, but the deep, dry rot of things that had died long ago and refused to disappear. The scent of closed rooms, of sealed histories. And beneath it all, sweetness. It caught at the back of her throat, delicate and wrong. Like dried flowers pressed into a book and forgotten. Like perfume lingering on fabric after the body has turned to dust. She swallowed and tasted it again. The sweetness stayed. The man coughed quietly, then stopped, as if afraid the sound might attract attention. His eyes moved constantly now, scanning corners, shadows, places where the fog pooled thickest. This air had been breathed before, too many times, by too many mouths. It carried memory in it. Breathing felt intrusive, like stealing. They found the ropes near the mast, coiled with precision that made the woman pause mid-step. Each loop lay perfectly atop the last, tension even, fibers aligned. This was not neglect. The man crouched, fingers hovering before he dared to touch one. When he did, the rope gave slightly under his grip, supple, strong, alive in a way no centuries-old rope should be. No cracking, he whispered, no rot. He lifted it gently, letting a length slide through his hands. The fibers were clean, maintained, recently handled. The word recently echoed too loudly in her mind. Someone had been here. Not years ago, not centuries. Here, in a place that should not exist anymore. The rope slipped from his fingers and fell back into its perfect coil, as if offended by the interruption. They found the bell near the helm, its surface dulled to a deep, lifeless bronze. It hung motionless despite the faint current of fog moving past the railings. The man raised the clapper slowly, his movements cautious now, respectful in a way he hadn't been before. He struck the bell lightly. Nothing. No echo, no dull metallic hum, not even a failed chime. He struck it again. Harder. Still nothing. He frowned, lifting the clapper once more, watching his hand as though it might betray him. When the bell failed again, he froze, staring at his palm. His fingers tingled, buzzing faintly, as if the vibration had nowhere to go and had turned inward instead. It should. He stopped himself. The bell swayed gently, obedient to gravity, disinterested in purpose. The woman felt it then. Sound was permitted here only when the ship allowed it. Below deck, the ship opened itself reluctantly. The corridors were narrow, oppressive, their walls darkened by time and touch. Doors stood ajar, not forced, not broken, simply left open, as if no one had seen the need to close them. Inside the cabins, life had stopped mid-breath. Boots rested neatly beside bunks, toes aligned. Coats hung from hooks, sleeves limp and empty. Tin cups sat on tables, faint rings marking where liquid had once stood and evaporated slowly, patiently. A deck of cards lay spread across one table, hands unfinished. No winner declared. Journals lay open on desks, ink faded but legible. Sentences trailed off, thoughts abandoned without punctuation, without conclusion. There were no signs of panic, no overturned furniture, no desperation etched into the space. The stillness was intentional. The woman felt as though she were walking through someone else's held breath. The first skeleton waited at the end of the corridor. It sat upright against the wall, spine curved awkwardly, skull tilted upward as if still searching for a face that never returned. Its arms were raised, elbows bent, hands open, palms outward, begging. The posture was so human, so desperate, that the woman had to fight the urge to look away. Farther down, another skeleton lay face down, ribs pressed flat against the floorboards. Its fingers were spread wide, bones driven deep into the wood. The nails were gone entirely, torn free, leaving dark grooves where panic had etched itself into the ship. These were not bodies claimed by sudden death. These were people who had time to understand what was happening, time to regret. The moment she stepped closer, the ship reacted. The air thickened, the corridor blurred at the edges. Sound rushed back, not the present, but the past. She was no longer herself. Smoke burned her eyes, heat pressed against her skin. Voices screamed behind a heavy wooden door, coughing, begging, choking. A hand gripped the door handle. Her hand. She knew what waited behind it. Sick men. Plague. death that breathed. She hesitated, just long enough. Fear whispered reasons, survival, logic, necessity. She turned away. Up the door closed. The latch slid into place with a sound louder than the screams that followed. The vision shattered. The woman staggered backward, clutching the wall, gasping as the present returned. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. She understood now. The ship did not show how they died. It showed why. Each skeleton told a different story. The man saw a sailor hide water beneath his bunk, watching others weaken, convincing himself it was fairness. After all, he had found it first. He saw another refuse to slow the ship for an injured crewmate, whispering that mercy was a luxury they could not afford. He saw men who told themselves they had no choice. And then he saw the truth. They always had. The deaths that followed were slow, inevitable, born not of violence but of calculation. No bloodshed, no dramatic betrayal, just moments where humanity was weighed against fear and found inconvenient. The ship remembered every decision, and it replayed them without mercy. The awareness crept in quietly. They were not being watched in the way prey is watched. No eyes, no shadows leaning closer. They were being evaluated. The woman felt it when she hesitated before helping the man down a narrow stair. The man felt it when he chose silence instead of reassurance. Each small choice seemed to echo, leaving an aftertaste in the air. The ship was patient. It had waited centuries. It could wait a little longer to see what kind of people they truly were. They did not speak its name. Instinct warned them against it, against shaping the thought too clearly. To name something was to acknowledge it. To acknowledge it was to invite it closer. Yet both of them felt it now, undeniable and vast. This ship did not exist to haunt. It existed to remember. And whatever lingered within its timbers was not content with ghosts alone. It fed on hesitation, on justification, on the quiet moment when a human chose themselves over another and called it necessary. The ship had learned long ago that this was the most reliable kind of death, and it was very interested to see what they would do next. Part 3. The Plague That Learned to Think. They left the corridor of skeletons behind them, but the ship did not let the sensation go. The passage leading toward the captain's quarters felt different from the rest, less like a hallway and more like a throat. The air grew thicker with every step, not with humidity, but with something harder to explain. Density, like memory had mass, and the ship had stored too much of it in this one narrow vein. The woman kept a hand against the wall as she walked. The wood felt cold, unnaturally cold, as though it had been kept away from sunlight for centuries. Yet it was smooth beneath her palm, worn not by time alone but by touch. Countless hands brushing it in passing, desperate or obedient, moving in the same direction. The man walked slightly ahead, shoulders tense. He didn't look back often, but when he did, his eyes carried the same question hers did. Are we still alone? The fog had stayed above deck, but down here the air had its own kind of haze, thin, invisible, a pressure that made their ears feel stuffed, their breathing too loud. Somewhere deeper inside the ship, something shifted. Not a footstep, not a creak. Something subtler, a change in attention, the way a room feels when someone wakes up. Every step felt earned and resisted. At the end of the corridor stood the captain's door. It was larger than the others, reinforced with iron bands dulled by rust. A symbol had been carved into it once, perhaps an anchor, perhaps a crest, but time had softened it until it became an almost recognizable scar. The man lifted his hand to knock. The door opened before his knuckles touched wood. It did not swing wide. It gave way slowly, deliberately, with the patient courtesy of something that had been expecting them. The hinges did not squeal, they sighed as if relieved. The woman's throat tightened. She felt the urge to step back, to refuse the invitation. Yet the ship had already taken so much from them, direction, certainty, sound, that refusal felt like an illusion. The doorway was not simply open, it was presented. Inside, the cabin waited in a hush so complete it seemed to swallow the light from their small flashlight. The beam moved across furniture that should have collapsed long ago. Desk, chair, shelves, still standing as if preserved in amber. And at the desk, Perfectly framed as if staged for discovery, sat a skeleton, upright. The captain's skeleton sat with a rigid dignity that made the woman's stomach twist. It was not sprawled or broken. It had not crawled into a corner to die. It had chosen this chair, its skull tilted down toward the desk as though still reading. One bony hand lay near an open journal. The other rested flat against the wood, fingers spread, nails worn smooth. An unconscious gesture of grounding, of holding oneself steady against panic. The journal's cover was leather, dark and salt-stained. The woman expected it to crumble when she touched it. It didn't. The leather was dry but intact, the binding stubbornly whole, as if the book had been protected by the same force that kept the ship afloat. She opened it carefully. At first, the handwriting was clean, disciplined. Dates, weather notes, cargo lists, mundane complaints about sailors, ports, supplies. The kind of journal a man writes when he believes the world is understandable. Then the script began to shift. Lines tightened, letters sharpened, ink grew heavier, pressed deeper into paper. The margin notes multiplied like nervous ticks. Entire paragraphs slanted downward, as though the captain's hand had trembled, fighting to keep up with the thoughts chasing each other through his skull. The last pages were frantic, not messy. Urgent, a man trying to outrun the moment when his mind breaks. The woman's flashlight trembled slightly. She swallowed, and even that sound felt too loud. The captain had not merely documented events, he had documented realization. The story in the journal did not begin with horror. That was the most unsettling part. The captain wrote about Porto like a fond memory. Markets loud with bargaining, wine thick and sweet, salt air mixing with cooking fires. The crew had been docked for repairs and supplies. Spirits were high. The men drank. They laughed. They became briefly ordinary. Then came the card game. It was described almost jokingly. A local tavern, smoke in the air, sailors crowded around a table. The captain joined in, not out of need but out of camaraderie. He wrote about the locals, charming, sharp-eyed, quick with a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. The stakes were small. Coins, trinkets, pride, and then at the end, a prize offered like an afterthought, a music box. The journal described it in too much detail for something supposedly trivial. The captain recalled the way the tavern light made its carved surface gleam. The way the local's hand lingered on it before letting it go. The way the man smiled when the captain won, as if losing had been the point. A harmless night, the captain wrote, but the ink dug hard into the page, as though he were trying to convince himself. The woman felt a cold certainty bloom inside her. That night had not been harmless. It had been a selection. The captain wrote that the music box was beautiful, ornate, too fine for a sailor's game. Its wood was dark, polished, smooth, carved with tiny patterns, vines, waves, a woman's profile half hidden among floral curls. The craftsmanship felt intimate, as if whoever made it had spent long hours close enough to breathe on it, to whisper into it. The captain described turning it in his hands, feeling a faint warmth in the wood despite the night's chill. Hearing, when he held it near his ear, a sound like distant breathing, so faint he thought it imagination. He wrote that the melody it played was unfamiliar. Not unpleasant, but wrong in its rhythm, as if it was trying to remember how music worked. He tried to throw it into the sea once, laughing at his own unease, but he couldn't. His arm froze mid-motion, stiff as iron. His fingers refused to open. And in that moment, he understood the first rule of the ship. You could make choices, but the ship could veto them. The woman stared at the page, pulse pounding. She felt suddenly aware of her own hands, her own ability to open and close them. The simple freedom of movement felt fragile. The man leaned closer, eyes scanning. "Does he say where it is?" he whispered. The woman's throat went dry. She thought, if it's still here. Then so is the reason. The captain's next entries were obsessed with the box. He wrote of sleepless nights, of hearing faint music when the box was closed, of waking to find it in different places than he'd left it. Sometimes on his desk, sometimes beneath his pillow. Once on the table beside the ship's bell, like a joke. Then he found the secret. At the bottom of the box was an inlay of shapes, 2 triangles carved into the wood, separated by a thin seam. The captain described how, absent-mindedly, he traced the edges with his nail. Feeling something shift, he slid one triangle. It moved with a soft click. He slid the second, aligning them. The triangles formed a perfect square, and the box changed. Not opening upward like a normal music box, no hinged lid, no obvious compartment, but unfolding outward. 4 small legs, previously tucked flush beneath it, extended sideways like spider limbs, widening its stance as if bracing. The captain wrote that he recoiled, heart pounding, because the movement felt alive. As the legs extended, the underside split open, revealing a cavity hidden in plain sight, an internal chamber sealed by geometry. The woman imagined it. A puzzle not meant for play, but for concealment. A secret designed to stay secret until the right hand solved it. Hands like his, hands like theirs. Inside the hidden chamber were 3 items, each described with a careful reverence that made the woman's skin prickle. A small bundle of hair tied with thread. Not a lock cut for affection, but for possession. A handkerchief, silk, folded neatly, stained faintly at one edge. The captain did not say with what. He only wrote that the stain was darker than it should be, as if it had absorbed something the fabric could not release. And a pendant, tarnished, simple, oval-shaped, hanging from a chain that had dulled to gray. The captain noted that when the light hit it at certain angles, he could see faint etchings, letters too worn to read. He wrote about asking sailors if they recognized the items, about the way men avoided his gaze, about the fear that slid into the crew like oil into water, quiet, spreading, impossible to contain. Then came the story. Not written as rumor, but as discovery. A woman, during a plague, blamed, abandoned, sealed inside her home for the good of the town. The captain wrote that she had screamed until her voice gave out, that no one opened the door, that her death was considered necessary, and that when her body was finally found, the pendant had been torn from her neck, her hair cut away, her handkerchief taken. Souvenirs, evidence, or ingredients. The woman's chest tightened. The ship's earlier flashbacks suddenly made sense. The theme wasn't random, it was targeted. This ship was built on the same kind of death, not murder, but justification. The captain's writing here became almost reverent, like a man speaking about a storm he can't fight but must describe. He called it many things: the morbid spirit, the plague widow, the one who remembers. He wrote that the plague had taken her body, but something else had survived. Not a ghost in the traditional sense, not a wandering soul, an intelligence shaped by death, fed by neglect, sharpened by betrayal. It did not simply haunt, it orchestrated. It learned what frightened men most: not the sea, not hunger, not storms, but responsibility. The moment when your choice or inaction seals another person's fate. The spirit didn't kill with claws or fangs. It did something worse. It arranged circumstances so that humans killed each other with their own fear. The captain wrote, in ink so heavy it had nearly torn the page, "It does not need to strike, it only needs to watch. We will do the rest." The woman felt sick, not because it was supernatural, but because it was true. The most horrifying monsters didn't need strength, they needed people. Near the end, the captain's entries shifted again, less frantic, more focused. He had found a pattern, a weakness. He wrote of old texts, of sailors' superstitions, of port whispers, of an apothecary who spat on the ground when he mentioned the pendant. The ritual was simple. That was the cruelest part. Salt, to bind, to weigh down, to deny movement. Fire, to cleanse, to release, to end the tether between relic and spirit. He wrote instructions like a recipe, precise and repetitive, as if repeating it enough times would make it real. Salt first, generously. Not a pinch, an accusation. Then fire. Hot and clean, no hesitation. Do not breathe the smoke if you can avoid it. Do not listen when it speaks. The woman's hands began to shake as she read. She could almost feel the grains of salt against her skin, could almost smell the coming smoke. She suddenly understood why the ship had allowed them into this cabin. It wanted them to learn. Knowledge in a place like this was never a gift. It was a setup. The final page held only a few lines. The handwriting was still legible but strained, as though the captain's hand had been pulled downward by invisible weight. He wrote about gathering salt, about preparing fire, about placing the music box on the desk, triangles aligned, square formed, legs spread like something ready to leap. Then he wrote one sentence, underlined twice so hard the paper split. I could not finish it. She would not allow me. The woman stared at those words until the letters blurred. A cold thought formed slowly, like ice thickening over water. If the captain couldn't complete the ritual, then the relics were never destroyed. Which meant they were still here. Somewhere on this ship, sealed by geometry, resting in the dark, waiting for hands brave or foolish enough to open them. Behind her, the man exhaled a sound too close to a sob. And somewhere beyond the cabin walls, deep in the ship's timbers, something seemed to shift its attention toward them. Patient, hungry, pleased. As if it had been waiting for them to read the last sentence. As if it had been waiting for them to understand. Part 4. The Captain Who Almost Won. The change was not dramatic. That was what made it terrifying. It began with the air. Inside the captain's cabin, the woman felt it thicken, as if the ship had inhaled. The faint sweetness, flowers pressed into rot, grew sharper. The smell of salt turned metallic. The candleless darkness seemed to gain texture, like cloth drawn tighter over their heads. The man closed the journal slowly, but the sound of leather meeting paper did not echo. It sank, as though the ship swallowed it. The silence that followed was not the old curated hush they had walked through earlier. This silence had a pulse. The flashlight beam trembled across the captain's desk. For a moment, the woman thought she saw the ink on the last page glisten, wet, newly written. She blinked hard, and it was mad again. Still, the suspicion remained. The ship did not only preserve the past, it could refresh it. Fog began to seep under the door in thin, pale fingers. That shouldn't have been possible. Fog belonged above deck, in open air. But it came anyway, curling along the floorboards like something that knew exactly where the gaps were. The woman swallowed. The taste of old sweetness clung to her tongue. "It knows," she whispered. The man didn't ask what she meant. His face had the rigid stillness of someone whose mind was sprinting to catch up with fear. He stared at the fog with the expression of a man who had just realized the room was not a room, but a throat closing. They had read the captain's last sentence aloud in their minds. And the morbid spirit, whatever intelligence lived here, had felt itself remembered. A thing forgotten can sleep. A thing remembered can wake. They stepped out of the captain's cabin and into the corridor, and the ship's silence shifted again. Less absence, more attention. The corridor did not look different, yet it felt rearranged. The walls seemed closer, the darkness deeper, the air colder. Even the wood beneath their boots seemed to resist them, not physically, but emotionally, like walking through a place that disapproved. Then they heard it. A sound behind them, slow and deliberate. Not a creak, not the settling of an old hull. A measured tap, followed by another. Then the whisper of something dragging gently across wood, as if a long sleeve brushed the floorboards. The woman turned sharply, flashlight beam slicing through the corridor. Nothing. Only the hallway and its open doors, the same still cabins, the same preserved objects. The beam trembled across an empty doorway and caught the edge of a hanging coat swaying slightly, though no wind touched it. The man's breathing grew loud. He tried to quiet it, but panic is not obedient. The footsteps came again. Closer. They had a rhythm that felt intentional, unhurried, patient, not chasing, waiting. The woman understood then that the spirit did not need speed. It did not need to catch them the way an animal catches prey. It only needed to move at the pace of inevitability. It had all the time in the world. They began to move faster, not running yet, but walking with purpose, with the stiff urgency of people trying to pretend they were still in control. The corridor opened toward a set of stairs leading back to the deck. The woman's hand tightened around the flashlight. The man kept glancing back, unable to help himself, as if looking would make the threat real enough to fight. Halfway to the stairs, the air changed. A sudden coldness wrapped around them, sharp and intimate, like fingers at the back of the neck. The woman's breath hitched. The flashlight beam flickered once, then steadied. The man stopped mid-step. At first, the woman thought he had tripped. Then she saw his posture, too straight, too rigid, as though something had hooked him from inside and pulled him upright like a puppet. He lifted a hand to his chest slowly, not clutching as someone in pain might, but touching as someone checking whether their body was still theirs. His eyes widened. His mouth opened. No sound came out. The woman took a half step toward him, reaching out. And then she saw it. Just for a moment, not fully visible but undeniable. Pale fingers pressing into his chest from the air itself, as if an invisible hand had reached through skin and ribs and found the heart like a switch. The fingers did not squeeze, they commanded. The man's pupils dilated sharply, his body went slack. He dropped without drama, knees folding first, then the rest of him collapsing in a slow, horrible surrender to gravity. The woman screamed, but the corridor absorbed it. The sound died as if the ship refused to let it travel. The morbid spirit did not attack like a beast, it performed an execution. Quick, silent, absolute. 4. Silence after screaming. She fell beside him, grabbing his shoulders, shaking him, calling his name. Her voice sounded wrong, small, distant, swallowed. She pressed her ear to his chest. Nothing. No heartbeat. Not even the faintest flutter. His skin was already cooling, as if the cold hand had left winter behind in his body. His eyes stared upward, unfocused, not pleading, not angry, simply stunned by the suddenness of his own absence. The woman's mind tried to reject it. Denial rose instinctively, bright and useless. This can't be real. This is a nightmare. This is shock. He'll breathe. He has to breathe. She slapped his cheek lightly, then harder, then pressed her fingers against his throat, searching. Nothing. She felt herself slipping into that terrible mental space where logic becomes an enemy because logic would mean accepting he was gone. The ship didn't even grant her the mercy of noise. No dramatic thunder, no crash, no music, only the cruel quiet of a life extinguished without ceremony. Somewhere behind her, a soft dragging sound approached. The spirit was coming not to chase her, to witness her decision. She realized with sick clarity what it wanted, for her to choose between staying with him, loyalty, love, denial, or leaving him to save herself. A human dilemma. A moral hinge. The ship loved hinges. Her fingers tightened around his sleeve. Tears blurred her vision. She whispered his name again, but the syllables sounded like they belonged to someone else. The dragging sound grew closer, and the worst part was this. She could feel the spirit's patience, its certainty. It wasn't angry. It was curious. She ran. Not because she wanted to, because her body made the decision before her heart could argue. Survival rose up like an animal reflex, brutal and humiliating. She stumbled backward, then turned and sprinted toward the stairs. Her flashlight beam bounced wildly, carving frantic shapes into the darkness. Shadows jumped, doorways yawned. The corridor seemed to stretch, the stairs retreating, as if the ship itself didn't want to let her go. She reached for her phone with shaking hands, desperate for a second light, a lifeline, a connection, anything to anchor her in reality. Her fingers slipped. The phone floor with a sharp crack that for once the ship did not swallow. The screen shattered and went black. Light died instantly. She froze in total darkness, the sudden blindness hitting like a physical blow. For one heartbeat, her own, she couldn't move. Panic exploded. The absence of sight turned the corridor into a mouthful of teeth. Then she heard the dragging sound again, closer, slow. It didn't need to rush. Now she couldn't see. Now she could only imagine. She forced herself to breathe. 1 inhale, 2. The air tasted sweet and rotten. Each breath felt like swallowing old grief. Her hands reached out, searching for the wall. Fingers found wood, cold, smooth, worn by countless touches. She pressed her palm to it like a vow. This is real. This is here. I am here. The captain's journal flashed through her mind like a flare in darkness. The ritual. Salt, fire, the music box with the hidden chamber, the geometric lock. If the relics were still on the ship, they were the tether. If she could find them, she could cut it. But the ship was not a straight line. The corridors twisted. Doors opened into rooms filled with silent furniture and preserved objects that could trip her, slow her, confuse her. She slid along the wall, moving by touch, counting door frames, remembering turns the way you remember the layout of a childhood home. Her heart hammered, but she tried to make her movements small, controlled, as if panic could be negotiated with. Somewhere behind her, the dragging sound paused. She realized something horrifying. The spirit wasn't following her blindly. It knew where she was. It could wait, and waiting, she understood now, was one of its favorite tools. She found the captain's cabin by accident or fate, her fingers catching the iron band on the door, the recognizable texture of rusted metal. She shoved inside, slamming the door behind her, though she knew it wouldn't matter. The fog had thickened in the cabin, pooling near the floor. Her bare ankles felt it like cold breath. She groped across the desk, knocking papers, brushing bone. The captain's skeleton stayed seated, unmoving, as if indifferent to her terror. Her fingers found the music box. It was there, warm. Not warm from sunlight, warm like skin. She nearly dropped it, forced herself to hold it. Her thumb traced the underside, finding the carved triangles. One triangle slid with a click, the second followed. Square formed, the box changed. Legs extended outward with that same spider-like certainty. The underside split open. Her fingers plunged into the hidden chamber and touched the relics. Hair like dry wire, silk that felt too soft to belong here, metal pendant cold as an accusation. She fumbled for salt in her jacket pocket. She remembered now, absurdly, that they had brought it for their meal. A small container, meant to season food on a romantic evening. Such an innocent thing, now transformed into weapon. She tore the container open with her teeth. Salt spilled across her hands, stinging small cuts she hadn't noticed until now. She poured it over the relics, over the hair, the silk, the pendant, over the open box, over the desk, over her own trembling fingers. The salt felt like pain, like truth. Then she needed fire. She shook with the effort of remembering. Lighter in the kitchen bag, candle. Anything. Her hands found the candle holders they'd brought. One candle was broken, but the other still had wax and wick. She struck the lighter. The flame appeared, tiny, fragile, and more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. She held it to the wax-soaked cloth, to the hair, to the salted pendant. Fire caught. It took greedily. Smoke rose, thick and sweet and foul. She turned her face away, coughing, remembering the captain's warning. Do not breathe the smoke. The room filled with heat. The fire crackled, loud in the ship's silence. And then the air screamed. The scream did not come from a throat. It came from everywhere, from the walls, the floorboards, the desk itself. An impossible, stretched sound that carried rage and history and accusation. A scream that had been held back for centuries and now poured out all at once. It was not pain. It was fury. The woman covered her ears, but the sound seemed to vibrate in her bones. She felt it behind her eyes, beneath her teeth, shaking her stomach like a rough sea. The fire flared higher, fed by something more than wood and silk. For a moment she thought she saw shapes in the smoke, a woman's silhouette, hair whipping like seaweed, hands reaching, face contorted not by suffering but by triumph denied. The scream rose, so long it became less sound and more environment, a world made of fury. Then, abruptly, it broke, like a rope snapping. A final, prolonged note tore through the cabin, and the woman felt something withdraw, ripped away, unwilling. The silence that followed was not empty. It was shocked, as if the ship itself had not believed she could do it. The ship shuddered, not a gentle rock. A deep, full-body convulsion, timbers groaning for the first time, metal creaking, old wood complaining as though waking from an unnatural sleep. The fog under the door thinned, then retreated as if sucked backward by an unseen breath. Air moved through the corridor again. The oppressive pressure in her ears eased. She stumbled out of the captain's cabin, blinking into the faint return of normal darkness. Still dim, still terrifying, but no longer possessed. The hallway felt larger. Less throat, more passage. She could hear the distant natural sound of water against hull. The ship was becoming a ship again. The woman stood shaking, soot on her hands, salt clinging to her skin like frost. Somewhere deep inside the vessel, something that had been awake fell quiet. Not politely. Violently, like a predator forced to release prey. She returned to where the man had fallen. Her steps were unsteady, her legs weak with adrenaline and grief. She was prepared to see him cold and still, to face the finality she had been refusing. But when she reached the corridor, the space where he had collapsed felt wrong. The air was colder there than elsewhere, as if winter lingered. The floorboards bore faint scratches she didn't remember. The shadows seemed darker. He was still there, still lying on his back, still staring upward. And yet, as she knelt beside him, she felt something that made her blood freeze. Not a heartbeat, but a faint warmth. Like a body that hadn't fully surrendered, or a body that had been returned carelessly. She pressed her fingers to his throat again. A pulse fluttered, weak, uncertain, like a moth trapped against glass. Her breath caught in her throat. Hope surged, sharp and painful. Then fear followed, because she knew, deep down, that the spirit's scream had not sounded like defeat. It had sounded like loss of control. And things that lose control often do not simply vanish. They retreat. They change strategies. The woman sat back on her heels, trembling, staring at the man's face. His lips were faintly blue. His chest rose and fell shallowly, as if his body remembered breathing but didn't fully trust it. She wanted to cry. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to scream until the ship answered again. Instead, she whispered, barely audible, "Please be you." And in the silence that followed, the ship gave her no reassurance at all. Part 5. What came back wearing his face? She reached her own boat, the way a drowning person reaches air, without grace, without thought, driven by the single stubborn fact of survival. The rope between vessels still held, slack now, as if the ghost ship had loosened its grip in grudging defeat. Her hands shook as she climbed over the rail. The metal felt real under her fingers, cold, ordinary, familiar, in a way that nearly made her cry. The moment she landed in her boat, something changed. A soft chorus of beeps rose from the console. Lights blinked, screens awakened. The GPS display bloomed into life, its map snapping into focus as if it had never died. The radio crackled, releasing a burst of static that sounded like a sigh. The compass needle steadied, pointing with confident certainty. It was so sudden it felt suspicious, like a magician revealing the trick too quickly, daring you to accept it. The fog that had pressed against her mind all night seemed to ease, thinning into nothing. The air tasted cleaner. Salt returned to being salt, not omen. She stared at the glowing instruments as though they were proof that the last hour had been a hallucination. Then she looked back toward the ship. It loomed in the mist, silent, unchanged in shape, but different in presence. Less awake, more hollow, like a body emptied of something that had animated it. She told herself, desperately, that this was what victory looked like. The boat disagreed with her by working perfectly again. She was still staring at the revived GPS when she felt it. A shift in the air behind her. Not a sound, she had learned not to rely on sound, but a pressure, like someone standing close enough that their body heat should have been felt. She turned. He stood at the rail, pale, wet, shaking, alive. For a moment her mind refused to assemble the image. It offered alternatives instead: grief, shock, a final cruel hallucination engineered by the ship. But the man's eyes were real. His lips trembled. His shoulders rose and fell in shallow breaths. The sheer impossibility of it hollowed her out. She took a step backward, then forward again, caught between terror and the aching desire to believe. "Hey," he whispered, as if loudness might wake something. His voice was thin, scraped raw. I'm here." Her legs almost gave out. She grabbed the edge of the console to steady herself, nails biting into plastic. "You?" Her throat closed. She tried again. "You died." His gaze flickered, not confusion but recognition, like someone hearing a truth they already carry. He nodded faintly once, as if agreement cost him effort. "I know," he said. And that was the first moment she realized. He wasn't denying it. He wasn't insisting he'd been fine. He spoke like a man reporting weather. He stepped toward her, slow, careful. Not like someone eager to be embraced, but like someone afraid of breaking a rule he didn't fully understand. He pressed a hand to his chest. The gesture was not dramatic. It was controlled, an attempt to contain something. His fingers splayed over the place where the invisible hand had touched him, where cold had reached inside and commanded his heart into silence. His breathing remained shallow, measured, as if deep breaths might hurt. "What do you feel?" she asked. Voice hoarse, he swallowed. His throat bobbed, and she noticed how pale his skin was. Too pale, like the blood had forgotten how to circulate properly. "Pain," he said, "but not like injury." His eyes lifted to hers, and for a second she saw something raw in them. Fear, yes, but also something else. A distance, a sense of being slightly out of sync with himself. "It's rhythmic," he added, "like it pulses when I think too hard, like something inside me answers." The woman felt cold spread along her arms. She remembered the captain's warning about smoke, about listening, about how some things did not leave cleanly when burned. They left residue. She watched his chest rise and fall, watched his hand press harder, as though trying to keep something from moving. "Do you remember what happened?" she asked. He hesitated, not the hesitation of someone searching memory, the hesitation of someone deciding what to reveal. "I remember falling," he said carefully, "and then being somewhere." He blinked. Not a place, a feeling, like standing behind glass, watching you. Her stomach turned. "You watched me," she whispered. He nodded again, almost apologetic. "I couldn't help it." She expected him to ask for comfort, for warmth, for reassurance that he was safe now. Instead, he looked toward the console, toward the revived screens, and his expression tightened. "Can you drive?" he asked. The question landed wrong, too practical, too sudden. She stared at him. Yes," she said. "Of course. But why?" He flinched, the smallest possible movement, like a nerve reacting. "Please," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her obey before she understood. Not authority, not threat, restraint. It sounded like a man holding himself back from something he feared he might do. "I don't want to touch it," he whispered, nodding toward the electronics. "I don't think I should." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the console. "What do you mean?" He swallowed again, throat working. "When I got close, it didn't like me." The way he said it was careful, neutral, not naming, avoiding the shape of the truth, like naming would invite it back. Her eyes slid to the ship behind him. It still loomed, still silent, still there, as if waiting to see what they did now that they believed they'd left. She started the engine. It turned over smoothly, as if grateful to be asked to function again. The hum of it felt almost comforting, human technology asserting itself against ancient wood and fog. The man took a cautious step closer to the console, as if testing an invisible boundary. The GPS flickered. Not a normal flicker. The screen dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again in a slow pulse that matched the man's breathing. He stepped back. The screen stabilized instantly. They stared at it in silence. The woman tried the radio. It crackled with static and then cleared. He leaned forward, curiosity or disbelief drawing him. The radio erupted into harsh noise loud enough to make her wince. The compass needle began to spin again, frantic and senseless. He recoiled. The instruments calmed, obedient once more. The message was unmistakable. The machines did not fail randomly. They failed for him. The woman felt sweat break across her spine despite the cold air. "Stay back," she said, and hated how her voice sounded, sharp, like command. He nodded quickly, almost relieved. "I will, I swear." He kept his hands visible, fingers spread slightly, as if proving he wasn't touching anything. She wondered, with sudden nausea, who exactly he was swearing to. They moved away from the ghost ship. At first, nothing dramatic happened. The sea remained calm. The fog thinned into ordinary haze. The boat cut forward through water that behaved like water again, waves breaking gently against the hull. And yet the woman could not relax. Her gaze kept drifting toward the console screen. Not the map, not the coordinates, but the faint reflection it offered when the light hit it right. In the glossy surface she could see herself. Salt-streaked, soot on her hands, eyes too wide. And behind her, she could see him. At first the reflection looked normal, pale man, exhausted, huddled against the rail. Then, as the boat shifted and the angle changed, she saw his eyes, not the eyes that looked at her directly. The eyes in the reflection were darker. Not physically, something deeper than color, a density, a focus, a knowing sharpness that made her chest tighten. The reflected eyes held her like a grip, and in them she saw not fear, but triumph. a tiny lift at the corner of the mouth that his real face did not show. A satisfaction so subtle she might have imagined it, except the moment she blinked, it was gone. Her hands shook on the wheel. She forced herself not to turn around immediately because she was terrified of confirming what she had seen. Terror has its own form of denial. She thought about the captain's journal, about the spirit's method. It didn't kill directly. It arranged. It forced choices, watched what humans did, fed on the consequence. And now, watching the way the electronics reacted to the man, she understood something colder. The spirit had not needed to kill him permanently. It had needed to mark him, to take something from him, or place something into him. When she burned the relics, she had severed the tether, but perhaps not cleanly. Perhaps the spirit had already reached outward, searching for a new anchor, a new vessel, a living body with a heart that had been stopped by its hand, a heart that had been opened like a door. A thought rose in her mind, slow and poisonous. What if the man returned because something returned with him? She remembered how he said he'd been somewhere, watching her through glass. That sounded less like death and more like captivity. Or infection. The plague had learned to think, the captain had written. The woman stared out at the sea and felt suddenly horribly small. Plagues did not die because you wished them away. They adapted. They waited. They found new hosts. The sea did not care. The boat moved steadily, leaving a faint wake. Birds appeared in the distance, cutting through the sky like ordinary life had resumed its schedule. The water flashed with sunlight in broken shards. Everything looked like the world they had known before the storm. That indifference was its own kind of cruelty. Nature did not acknowledge nightmares. It did not mark the boundary between safety and horror. The ocean that had tried to kill them the night before now held them gently, rocking them like a lullaby. The woman watched the horizon, searching for land, for anything solid. She wanted something immovable, something that didn't breathe fog and remember moral failures. Behind her, the man sat quietly, hands clasped, head lowered. He looked like a survivor. But survivors did not usually make machines malfunction just by approaching. And survivors did not wear triumph in reflections. The GPS guided them flawlessly. When the woman touched it, routes appeared, coordinates locked, their heading stabilized. She followed it, trusting the cold logic of satellites more than her own exhausted mind. The man stayed back as he'd promised, keeping distance from the console as if it were a holy object he was forbidden to approach. At one point he shifted slightly, leaning forward as if to see the screen, and the map flickered. He leaned back at once, almost flinching. "Sorry," he whispered. The woman nodded without looking at him. Her throat felt tight, her mouth dry. The coastline began to appear as a darker line in the distance. The sight should have brought relief, but instead it brought a new fear. Soon they would be among other people. Soon they would have to explain. And if something was wrong with him, if the plague had chosen him as vessel, then bringing him home was not rescue. It was delivery. Her mind tried to reject that thought. Love fought back fiercely. He's alive. He's alive. He's alive. That should have been enough. But the ship had taught her something she couldn't unlearn. Survival is not always victory. Sometimes it is the beginning of the next phase. They did not speak about the ship, not directly. They spoke around it, about heading, about fuel, about the cold. The man asked if she was hurt. The woman answered automatically. Their voices were careful, small, as if loudness might summon memory from the water. Neither of them looked at the other for long. When she glanced back, she caught him staring at the console with an expression that was almost hunger, subtle, restrained, quickly masked. When he noticed her watching, he looked away, blinking too slowly. She kept steering. Behind them, the ghost ship shrank into fog, becoming a suggestion again, then a rumor, then nothing. But the woman did not feel it vanish. She felt it settle, like a thought placed gently into the world, a seed planted in ordinary life. As land drew nearer, the man spoke softly. "Can you keep doing it?" he asked. "The steering, the navigation." "Yes," she said, because what else could she say? He nodded. and his hand pressed again to his chest as that rhythmic pain pulsed, answering something inside him. In the console's dark glass for just a moment, she saw his reflection again, and the eyes looking back were not pleading. They were patient. They were knowing. They were waiting. The ocean stretched behind them, calm and indifferent, reflecting the sky like black glass where the sunlight couldn't reach. And far beneath that surface, beyond fog, beyond wood, beyond salt and fire, something remembered everything. Not because it loved the past, but because it was preparing for the next choice.